The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Good evening and welcome to the Leadership with Biana Kovic show. And thank you for being with us. Our topic, leadership, focuses on leaders such as yourselves. We believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned through practice and awareness. We hope that our conversation will help you become more reflective and effective when it comes to your own leadership practices and enable you to leave a positive legacy. Our very special guest is Dr. Amy Cooper Hakim. Dr. Amy holds a Ph.D. and is an industrial organizational psychology practitioner and workplace expert. She is a speaker, author, and the executive consultant and founder of the Cooper Strategic Group. Dr. Amy helps employees and employers to get along better and coaches leaders and employees to improve productivity, morale, satisfaction, and overall work-life balance. Her book, Working with Difficult People, provides clear strategies to effectively handle the 10 types of difficult bosses, colleagues, and subordinates. The book hit number 1 in sales at Amazon for Business Etiquette Books and was highlighted in Parade magazine. Dr. Amy is currently putting the finishing touches on her next book about work-life balance. She has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, NBC News, Chicago Tribune, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, CNN, CNBC Make It, and MSN. She has also been a guest on a variety of news and radio shows. Dr. Amy has a blog at Psychology Today called Working with Difficult People. Dr. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Amy, you're the consultant and a public speaker, and you actually have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Sure. So I am an industrial organizational psychology practitioner and workplace expert. I help employees and employers get along better. I go into organizations and speak with executives and their team to help them to open the lines of communication, reduce overall conflict, and get what they want and need from everyone on the team.
And one of your expertise is working with difficult people.
It is. I help people to understand what it is that makes the other person tick so that we can truly get what we want and need from that individual while helping to make it more of a reciprocal relationship so that that individual benefits as well.
And you revised your grandmother's book called Working with Difficult People that was published in 2016. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the book.
Sure. So my grandmother passed away many years ago, but she was a mentor of mine and actually encouraged me to go into the field of industrial psychology. And she was a real special woman and actually counseled and coached individuals within the workplace setting and wrote a number of books. And one of those books was Working with Difficult People. And I realized that the book was still selling and it was very outdated. So there was not any mention of the internet or, say, dealing with a boss who's looking at his smartphone instead of you. There's nothing like that because it didn't exist. And also work-life balance issues were not as prevalent. I recall my grandfather coming home from his work as a judge, and he would literally be home on time to eat dinner every day. And then he would pick up his briefcase and go on with his day that next day. But there was specific time carved out for family, specific time carved out for work. And that balance has been blurred over the years, especially with the advancement of technology and such. So I approached the book publisher and asked if I might keep much of the bones of the book, but actually enhance it so that I could modernize it for today's working world. And it was such an honor and a real privilege to revise and modernize my grandmother's work It was a very special and meaningful way for me to add to her legacy and to do what I do on a daily basis with my clients and place it into book form. So
yeah, and I think what's so amazing is actually you give tips how to deal with people like that. You're just not talking about it, but you're actually saying do this or do that. So
right. So the way that the book is designed is I have it broken into 3 separate parts. How to deal with the people who are difficult, who are also your boss. How to deal with difficult subordinates, and then how to deal with difficult colleagues. And so when you're able to distinguish, because say a narcissistic boss is going to need to be treated differently than or reacted to differently than you would a narcissistic subordinate or a narcissistic colleague. So being able to distinguish first off who they are, so where they fall in their relationship to you, and then also after recognizing what it is that makes them who they are or might cause them to behave or react in a certain way, then taking the emotion out and deciding what can I practically do so that I can get what I want and need from this person. Mm-hmm. And so there are specific strategies and also tactical tips and real-world dialogue that can be used and inserted to help in specific situations. And I actually find that my clients sometimes refer to the index in addition to the table of contents to try to find who and how to best relate to various types of people in the workplace setting. And a lot of this can also be extended beyond to to just other relationships. Mm-hmm. A difficult neighbor, a difficult family member. So I actually was on the news recently to talk about difficult parents. I have young children, so in this, when you're on the carpool line, what do you do with a difficult parent? So that was a sort of fun twist. But there's definitely, when we realize how to better relate to people and really to take emotion out, that's something that's so important and very difficult to do. But when we don't take something personally and instead we realize that that difficult person likely has his or her own issues that are not related to us, they're just taking it out on us. It doesn't dismiss the behavior and it doesn't condone it, but it helps us to place it in a box and then deal with it accordingly so that we can do what we need to do with that person and move on.
You mentioned emotions, and my curiosity is how do you effectively deal when it's happening? Because it's easy to take emotions out when you have time to think about it, but when it's actually happening in that particular moment, fight or flight kicks in. So sometimes we can really monitor ourselves or kind of put ourselves in the best, even emotional mode. So what suggestions do you have?
Well, something that's really important is to first off decide whether or not it's really worth it to be upset. So that's where we have to put our big boy pants or big girl pants on and say, is this something that's going to bother me? I like the rule of 5. Is it going to bother me in 5 minutes, in 5 days, in 5 hours, in 5 months, in 5 years? So if you can say, gosh, this is something, the way this person is behaving or acting is going to impact me in the long term, then no, I don't want to have to deal with this. I need to put a stop to this issue, whether it be severing the relationship or hopefully repairing it in some way. But if it's something that is something that will likely just pass quickly, then not getting upset about it might be something that's easier to tackle, recognizing that it's just that person's personality, but he or she is still able to get the job done. So I like to encourage people to seriously take a deep breath. The concept that we learned when we were in grade school about taking a deep breath, counting to 10, it truly works because what it does is it stops you from getting overly aggravated. Before responding, whether it be in person, by text, by email, just stop. Stop and breathe. And when you do that, then you're able to collect your thoughts. I just did that right now. I just took a very short, deep breath, and that allowed that moment to go, okay, let me diffuse a little bit. Some people also say if you take your fingertips and stick them together almost as if you're in prayer mode, but you don't have to put your hands together, but just your fingertips, let them touch, making all of your fingertips touch, so your pinky to your pinky, your ring finger to your ring finger and such, can help you to just get yourself in that taking a breath, taking a beat.
So as I mentioned, you talk about different difficult employees or bosses and so on and so forth. And what I really appreciate, you actually talked about dealing with self-centered people. Can you talk to us a little bit more? How do you effectively deal with someone who is overly self-centered?
I think that in today's world, many people are. Yeah. I think many people actually are very entitled, and they appear to think that their opinion or their idea is more important than yours. And it's important to take our ego out of the situation when we can, recognize that, hey, our idea might not always be the only or the best. There may be others that have great contributions or great ways that they can get to an end result. but we also need not be stepped on. And so we have to be able to be assertive enough while being polite and respectful so that we can get what we need and move on. I personally don't like hanging around self-centered individuals. So if someone is bragging or sharing things overly and think that they're the best, then a lot of times I'll just dismiss it politely and move on. If this is about work, I can chat. Otherwise, I need to go.
So what you're saying to us, it's about setting boundaries, right?
Correct. We need to set the boundaries. We need to understand what we will take, what we need to take from other people, meaning I'm able to deal with someone who says this, acts this way, does this, if it's 5% of the time, or if I'm not on a deadline. But if this person is going to step on me, embarrass me, make me look like I am incompetent just so that he or she looks more competent, well, then that's not going to happen. And there's some easy things that we can do so that we make sure that in addition to setting boundaries, we also set the tone for the relationship. So if someone is very much into sharing that he or she is the best in the world, no one is better, and perhaps let's say that you had an idea, and that idea then is presented by somebody else as his or her idea. So if Susie says, at this big staff meeting, instead of you guys were chatting about something in the elevator on the way up, and then Susie bursts out with this great, amazing idea and takes all of the credit, then that might make you feel very uncomfortable, and rightly so. So by piping up in that meeting if appropriate and saying, actually, I'm so glad that you brought up what we were talking about in the elevator, Susie. Mm-hmm. If it's something that happened beforehand, then you could even send an email to the team. I was chatting with some of the colleagues and look forward to sharing an exciting idea. So that allows you to, without being any type of a braggart yourself, be assertive and make sure that you are actually known and heard. It's a very fine line because we don't want to be that person who comes off as one who isn't a team player. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we are so careful so as to be polite that we end up getting stepped on.
Yeah, and I can definitely relate to that because, you sometimes think you don't want to be the one that spoils the party. Mm-hmm. But my question is, how do you deal with bosses that are taking credits for the work that they don't do?
What I like to do in that instance is make sure that any interaction that I have with that boss is copied in an email format. So it doesn't have to be in a way that makes the boss feel uncomfortable. It could be in a praiseworthy way. But if your boss is not the head of the company, but perhaps lower in the chain, it might be nice to CC the boss's supervisor and say, I'm so excited to work on this project with you. Thank you so much for letting me take the lead here. Under your guidance, I will blah, 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 blah. And so doing that lets whoever it is know that, in fact, you were able to run with your idea. Thank you, boss, for giving me the chance to run with this idea. I won't let you down. And what's very interesting is top leaders are those who give their employees the chance to make it, and to, when they fall, the leaders are there to pick them up. But they let them run with the ideas. They let them have amazing, they're empowering them to actually create new things, work on their own, work together. And I always tell my clients, my goal for them is to literally have them sitting in their desk with their feet on the desk, like literally sitting in their chair with their feet up on the desk. And by doing that, they are then free to think about the vision and the mission and the strategy and to go into what leaders should be doing so that they can have the wherewithal to move their company or their team forward. And when we're too caught up in the minutia, then we're not able to do so. So it's really managing your manager and setting those boundaries and making sure that you publicly praise, but also have a paper or an email format proof that an idea is yours and your true and sincere appreciation for letting your boss let you take the lead.
Some of the companies have a very strict guidelines when it comes to chain of commands. And in my previous was definitely even chain of commands when you're sending emails, like who should be CC'd on that email and how you should go about it. What are your thoughts on that when the company is very stringent about, how you CC people, how you talk to people, and so on and so forth?
Well, if there are rules like that, then, obviously we need to adhere to them. You can still keep an electronic folder. So you can either make everything into a Word doc and save it on your computer, or you can save it, say, in your Outlook and just create a separate folder of any emailed communications between, say, you and your boss or you and the individual who may be taking credit for your ideas. And then if you ever need to present it, you can. But I think that the key thing, if you can't write it by email and create that paper trail, would just be to speak about it when appropriate with whomever can listen, so that people do know indeed that it's your idea. But at the end of the day, it's not about getting credit like that. It's about doing your job, doing it well, and moving forward. It's also important, though, to note that you don't necessarily need to get credit for your work in that regard. If the standard protocol within an organization is such that everyone knows that the manager assigns and the manager takes credit, and that's just the company culture, then it can be known, hey, this is Biana's work, we know that, but Tom is taking the credit. That's just standard, and it's even unspoken. But the best leaders that I've seen, and when I can coach a leader to change his or her mind and mantra so that instead of taking the credit, actually praising the individuals on the team who made that project happen, it ends up making that leader look better, because that means that he or she is truly able to lead and inspire others to work together to do more than they could do by themselves. And top leaders really surround themselves with people who have superior skill sets so that they can work in a complementary fashion to advance the team or the organization's agenda.
So recognizing employee and providing that level of freedom for them to shine and succeed.
Oh, definitely. Many people I know of actually prefer to take a job where there may be less pay, but more freedom, more flexibility, more of an opportunity to actually contribute and feel that they're making a meaningful difference. Every day at work, you need to be able to at least say that you've done one thing that is meaningful. You've made one dent in a big project. You've done something to move some vision or part of the mission forward. If not, then it's almost like we're that cog in a wheel and, we're running and we can't get out. And we don't want that. We need to feel important and valued. And so when a leader is able to appreciate people for who they are and for what they can bring to the table and for their individual differences and their unique contributions, then they're actually creating a strong team, and a team with people who will use candor and true ideas and speak freely and work openly. And that's really what will be an ideal situation.
Your other expertise is advising people on work and life balance. And I was wondering, how can one successfully achieve that?
So this is something that is actually a huge passion of mine. I like the idea of working hard, but I also like the idea of playing hard. If all we do is work, and we don't enjoy whatever that means to each individual, then we end up burning out and resenting the work that we're doing. And so it's very important to set specific boundaries. I actually have a very clear agenda, and I have a calendar, and I make sure that I know specifically what it is that I am doing and when I am working, also when I am playing. And so I will literally carve out on a schedule specific time off. Just like you would carve out time for a meeting, you can carve out time for a coffee or time to go to a yoga class or something that makes you feel happy. And it needs to be in a schedule, and it needs to not be moved or bumped, just like you wouldn't move a very important meeting. And so when we're able to recognize and place value on the things that bring us joy and realize that that is what life is about, then we can fit everything else in. And when we condense our time and chunk it, I like to encourage people to work for 25 minutes and not look at email or respond to text messages, even answer phone calls if possible, and then take a 5-minute break and do it all over again. We're much more productive, and we can chunk our time, get our work done, and then know, okay, I've got these 3 hours or 2 hours or 45 minutes for myself. It's very, very important to note the distinction and to determine what it is that brings you that peace and that balance, and make sure that you attain it every day.
I used to work in a highly workaholic culture where people were actually considered that you have to work all the time. So how do you bring the balance into the culture that is so much focus on, how many emails you read, how many emails you respond, and so on and so forth?
When you're in that type of a grind, and that's the culture and that's the expectation, then it can be very challenging to step out. I had a job right out of grad school, and I lasted there about 3 weeks because they didn't want me to take a lunch break, and they had all of these rules. I couldn't answer my phone, and I was literally glued to my desk, and it was really uncomfortable, and I felt like I was micromanaged and tried to make it work, but just realized the culture didn't fit. So it may not be a good cultural fit for you if you're not up to or interested in that type of grind, but that might be what, is needed for your particular career or industry. So if so, then the key thing to do would be to make sure that you put in the necessary hours and the time at work as expected, but then specifically turn off your phone for a certain period. So something that I suggest in those instances, let's say that you have a type of job where you are always on. You are expected to answer your phone even if you're out on a date or it's the middle of the night. You just have that type of position and role. Then it's a good idea to let your boss know that you are willing to do that. However, from this time to this time, you cannot answer the phone, and you'll make sure that you respond to all messages otherwise at a certain point. So as an example, I worked with somebody who was in a big finance role within an organization, and she was expected to always work, to stay late at the office. She would oftentimes miss dinner with her family, and then right when she get home, she'd get barraged with more emails, more text messages, and she couldn't breathe. And so we worked something out with her boss so that she stayed at the office until a standard hour of 6 or 6:30, and then she left, even if she was in the middle of something, unless it was a major crisis. And she committed to check her email and to respond to all urgent messages and text messages at 9:30 each night. So she knew that despite the grind, she had a 3 or a 3.5 hour window where she could be with her family, where she could unwind and then jump back in. And if it ended up that there was nothing urgent, she would respond to the other things in the morning. Mm-hmm. And so by doing so, and by the boss granting her that little leverage, it really, really helped her to feel more satisfied so that she could actually perform well. And a great line to use is, I'm happy to be focused solely at work while I'm at work, but I need to have that same courtesy when I'm not. And so it's all about courtesy. It's all about respecting the individual. And I need to know, right? So I need to make sure that as the employee, I can say to my boss, I'm important enough to have this, whatever that is, and make sure that it's reasonable. So I think it's not unreasonable for this woman to say, I want to be with my family, but I commit to jumping back on. And she timed it so that her kids would already be back in bed. She would be able to do so. Now, would she prefer not to check in at 9 or 9:30? Yes, of course. Mm-hmm. But that was the expectation of the job.
But it's interesting what you're saying to us. You have to know your work style, what works for you, and then speak up and let other people know.
Sure, and it can be different. What makes you feel, exhausted might make someone else energized. So we have to see, and also based on life cycle and where we are, whether we are right out of school or close to retirement, our stamina might be different, our drive, our goals. There are some people who are going to do anything and everything to get that promotion, and they recognize and they say, in order for me to get to this point, I'm going to burn the midnight oil for the next 3 years. And once I reach that, I need to relax. So we can all push without a break, but we can't do it that long for an indefinite amount of time. So we need to set that goal, and it might be I'm not going to have any balance for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I don't recommend that, but people do that. We go through stages in life where we need to in order to get to that next thing. Say a lawyer who wants to make partner, or there are times where you just have to put in the hours. But then after a certain point, you're able to say, I'm done, or here are the parameters that I need to set. I like to encourage my clients to every day make sure that they do something that will help them physically, spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. So when you are, say, working, that can be fulfilling an intellectual component. If you are exercising, then that might be a physical component. But let's say that you take a yoga class and you feel some type of emotional or spiritual fulfillment in addition to that physical exercise component. You can actually mix and match. If I go on a walk and I'm speaking to my sister long distance on the phone while walking, then I might hit multiple components. And the key is every single day to know that you've given yourself the ability to help move yourself in a positive direction physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And when you can do so, then it helps you to feel a little bit more fulfilled and realize, again, that you're more than just an individual who is going to work every day or, a parent who is taking care of a family every day. There's more to it than that. And I think that when we allow ourselves the opportunity to have that and to feel grateful for the blessings that we have, then we see the world with different glasses, and it makes our everyday mundane tasks and chores more tolerable.
What I liked about it is that actually what you're saying to us, you have to give yourself permission to do other things on a daily basis besides your job.
sure. And I think that if we focus our energy on gratitude, it sometimes seems a little hokey, but it really works. If you try your best to determine 1 or 2 or 3 things in a day that truly make you feel grateful, then your whole day you're focused on finding those things. So someone might write a gratitude journal in the morning or at the end of a day, or even just think the thoughts. But I find actually physically writing them down can help, or typing them on a Word doc. But the idea is whether it's 1, 2, or 3 things, what are you grateful for? And it could be that, you didn't spill your coffee, or that it tasted great, or that you didn't get stuck at too many lights on the way to the office. It doesn't have to be something huge and over the top and extraordinary in order for you to be grateful. I live in South Florida, and we don't really have many seasons, but I love it when it gets a little bit cool. And I also have a particular tree outside of my house that blooms only for a certain number of months a year. And whenever it is in bloom, it's just beautiful. Anyone who'll come over will talk about this particular tree. And so I can see it from one of my front windows. And I make myself stop and pause and look at that tree when I see it. I just take a 2 seconds to actually look and just breathe it in. It's beautiful, and it makes me feel happy. So that's something that doesn't take a lot of time out of my day, but I appreciate it, and it makes me feel that little element of joy. So that might be something that I would write in my gratitude journal.
So it's interesting because it's similar to meditation. What you're saying to us, stop, pause, and think, and reflect, and appreciate small things. Right?
Yes, I think that we are so caught up in what everyone else has from a material standpoint. And I think that in today's world, when we see everything, it's very hard to not try to keep up with the Joneses when you see everything on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And it's just a different world. Everything is public. So it's sometimes nice just to retreat and just be grateful. And when you can pause and be grateful, then your whole world has a different type of an approach. And if you catch yourself getting agitated and you need to take that breath, like we were speaking about at the start of this interview, that's okay. Stop, pause, allow yourself the chance to breathe, allow yourself the chance to think before responding to that email, responding to the text, saying yes to run an errand that you don't particularly have time for or an inkling to help. You don't have to necessarily in the workplace always be saying yes to every single thing. You can say to your boss, I'm happy to take on this task. I'm happy to run this errand. However, I want you to know by doing so, that will mean that I have to take something else off the plate, or I have to move this down the level from a priority standpoint. If I take on this task, then that will mean I won't be able to finish this for you by the end of the day. Is that okay? So we're not saying no, because it's important in the workplace to say yes when possible. We're saying yes, but we're saying yes with a condition. Yes, I can do this, but I can't do everything.
I have to ask you another question. Like, some folks are just period afraid to speak up. What are your thoughts on that? What suggestions you have for them?
I think it depends on our audience, right? I mean, if you're speaking to your boss, you're going to feel much more intimidated perhaps than you might a colleague. Some bosses, by the way, have the same type of intimidation when speaking to a powerful subordinate, because they don't want to in any way mess up or get caught or stumped and then appear inferior. So everyone from all different angles I've seen in different roles can feel that type of intimidation, that type of insecurity. And the best thing to do is to practice what you want to say in advance. If you can role play with someone, say a friend or a loved one, not a colleague, not anyone associated with work, but if you're able to role play outside of the office, that can actually help you to feel more confident. If you can record yourself and watch it back, that's a great way to see how you look, not only what you sound like and what your message is, but how you look during the transaction. That's very important because you don't want to give off body language that might seem overly defensive or aggressive. You can be positive and polite in your approach and your message. And so by practicing it, it can really help you to feel more confident.
So you worked with many leaders, and I was wondering, are there any traits that leader needs to have to be a truly successful leader?
I think having an open mind is critical. And I think being flexible is something that is difficult for many. But once we are able to truly be flexible to different ideas, recognizing that perhaps what we think isn't the best, but that there is someone else who might be better or have a better idea than us, having that open mind can help us to move mountains and then empower others to really make the team or the company a better place.
And is there any difficult part of being a leader?
Well, sure. I mean, I think it can be very tough, especially if you're not ready to be a leader. So I think recognizing that even if you're a naturally inclined to lead and you're a naturally born leader, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need skills and special training and coaching in order to enhance your skill set. So some people have more of an outgoing tendency. They may be more comfortable speaking in front of groups or directing others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be an effective leader. We have to know who we're leading so that we can adjust our leadership style to better manage those individuals. And so asking questions of the people we lead, seeing what we can do to help them to be successful is going to be a much more effective way to move an agenda than barking orders.
So staying curious and asking questions and getting to know the people that you're working with.
All vital, yes.
My next question is, do you think that every leader is also a good manager?
Actually, managing and leading are two separate skill sets. So a manager directs and a leader inspires. As a manager, I might be very effective at getting a bunch of people to follow orders, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm inspiring them to do more than they thought they could ever do. And so effective leaders are most likely also effective managers, but it doesn't always work in the reverse. So I could be a very effective manager, but not really know how to lead my people.
You recently actually wrote an article on LinkedIn, how to deal with Hillary or Donald in your office. And I was wondering, I actually read it. It was written in 2016. It was quite an interesting article. And I was wondering if you can share what inspired you to write that article and about the article itself.
So I wrote that actually before the election. LinkedIn approached me and asked if I would write an article. And I didn't want to get particularly political. I actually advocate for staying apolitical in the workplace. I think that unless you work in a political environment, that it's really not helpful. It's very divisive to go down either path, whether you are with the majority or with the minority. It can be very, very difficult. So when they asked me to do this, I said, okay, I will, but I'm going to not be offending anyone. And I reached out to some very, very strong proponents in both fields, and I said, okay, am I offending you? Am I offending you? And so it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek approach to recognize that we do deal with people, whether they intend to be difficult or not. We all, even, you and I, we all have difficult tendencies and parts of our personality. And so when we recognize what they are and we're able to say, okay, this I can tolerate and this I can't, or this I can tolerate if this person makes this little tweak, and here's how I might have to help to manage his or her behavior so that I get what I want or need from that individual, then that's how we can be most effective.
Well, what I liked what you mentioned is managing your bosses or colleagues' behavior, which is pretty interesting to me because usually people that are caught in these dramatic situations, they feel that they are powerless. But you actually say that you can be empowered to actually manage someone's behavior.
Sure. So let's say that you have a boss who micromanages you. Boss is on top of you, doesn't let you breathe, always wants to know where you are with the project, what you've done, show me your work, and it's so distracting that you actually are not successful. You can't move forward, and you're just annoyed and irritated also. So if you're unable to take the emotion out, you're sitting around, getting upset, even if you're grabbing your coffee, you're venting to your coworker, it's just a horrible situation. So instead of huffing and puffing and making that your workday every day, managing your manager would simply be speaking to your manager and saying, hey, Mary, I would love if we could chat for a couple minutes about what I need in order to be most productive at work. In order for me to be productive, I need to have 2 hours of uninterrupted time to get my work done. I need to have a full week to work on a project before, you approach me to ask you about it, whatever it is. But the idea is in order for me to be most productive, I need. And every manager wants his or her employee to be productive because not only does that mean that the task is getting done, but they also look good to the superior. So the idea is to couch it in that way so that they then will at least perk up their ears to say, okay, well, so what do you need? And so the idea with somebody who, say, is hounding you and always wanting to find out what it is that you've, where you are in your tasks and your projects, for that person, you might say, in order for me to be most productive, I need to know that I can sit down and work without being interrupted. I know that you want me to keep you informed. So might we have a Google Doc so that you can click on it as you wish to see where I am, and I promise to update it hourly. Or would you mind if I meet with you at the start and finish of each day? And just give you an update at that point instead of stopping midday. And I promise if I have a question, I'll go to you or to the appropriate resource to get the answer. So that's how we manage our manager, because the manager knows that our intent is to get the job done. And we are saying, I know myself best, and here's what I need in order to be successful.
So what is the best way to delegate responsibilities?
The best way to delegate responsibility is to understand the skill sets of the individuals involved and give people the opportunity to do what they do best and let them know why they are given that responsibility. So if you have a team of 5 and you have a big task to get done, teams are different from groups. Groups are just bunches of people who hang out together, bystanders at a football game. A team is literally made of a group of individuals who work interdependently to get a job done. And that interdependence is the key difference. And we can't work effectively in a team if we can't rely on one another. And we need to be able to delegate different responsibilities and tasks to others in order to accomplish something that's much larger or broader in scope. So, but by knowing the skill set and also the interest level of the individual, you can't just give somebody a task that they don't like, even if they're good at it. Maybe someone wants to work hard to learn a new skill and try something new and maybe buddy up with someone who has more experience. So we have to understand our staff and understand their goals, but really look at their skill set and say, here's what I need from you and here's how much time you have to complete it. Is this reasonable? What do you need from me in order to make this happen?
So it's almost like you're facilitating conversations with teams all the time.
Sure. I think that in any relationship, whether it be workplace or personal, the one issue that I see more often than not that is the cause of problem is poor communication or lack of communication or noisy communication. When we talk about communication noise, it's literally like that interference that you hear when you can't connect, or in the old days where you couldn't get the antenna to work on a TV set. So there was a lot of noise, crackly noise. And so that's what happens when we communicate, and what we are saying isn't necessarily being heard or received as we intend. And so opening the lines of communication is critical. And it's so interesting because more often than not, when I am in an organization speaking to an executive and the team, I see that they sometimes are really trying to get to that same end result, but they're just clashing in the way that they're trying to get there. And so speaking about it can help them to uncover and open and have those aha moments so that they can work together and really work interdependently to move forward. And so when we encourage that open communication and we let the other side know that we hear them, it's very effective. When I interact with someone by phone or in person one-on-one, the first thing that I do when I'm done with that conversation is send an emailed recap of the conversation. Here's what I heard, or here's what we agreed to, and write it out. And then at the end of that email, I will say, if I've missed something, please let me know. And by that person reading the email and saying, actually, yes, you're right, but I thought we said, then we open the lines of communication. We keep the dialogue going until we agree to whatever it is that we've come to for that project or for a next step. And if they say, yes, actually, this is exactly what we said, wonderful, then we can have that as a form of an emailed paper trail so that we know what we said when. And if that's someone that I don't particularly interact with too often, before I have that next phone call or that next dialogue, I can actually go back to my email and I can see what it is that we agreed to or what we spoke about last so that I can come to that next conversation prepared and ready to discuss where we need to go next.
So what you're saying to us, it's good to have a paper trail for everything that you do.
Definitely. It really is. And if you are the boss and you are delegating or you are coaching, giving some feedback, suggestions for change, you can ask the employee to send you the emailed recap. After you have your one-on-one, hey, please send me an email, let me know what it is that we spoke about so I can make sure we're on the same page. So that doesn't take any extra time off of you and your deliverables and your tasks or your meetings, but it allows that person to have a chance to recap and maybe even to take a beat and say, you know what, hey, I know we said this and I know I was nodding my head, but I don't really remember what I need to do. Can you give me a little more information? Or if that person is uncomfortable asking in person for clarification, maybe by email that person is more comfortable doing so.
I'd like to segue a little bit into employee satisfaction. And, I've been reading in a newspaper that usually employees spend, I think the big turnover is happening about 60 days in the workplace. So how do you maintain employees and keep them happy and engaged and hopefully use their talents past 60 days?
Well, the key is making sure that the individual feels that he or she is a unique individual and an important contribution or contributor to the organization. So getting a chance to know the individual is key. When the person comes to work that first day, sometimes the boss will want the employee to just start running and going and not even give any type of an onboarding process. Organizations that allow for an onboarding period have better success in not having such drastic turnover at that 60 or 90-day mark. And so something that is easy to do is to give the new employee a peer or a buddy, a mentee of sorts, so that that person becomes the mentee and then they have a mentor or a buddy that they can go to ask questions not only about the everyday job, but perhaps the organizational culture. It's also great for the boss to sit down with the employee and ask specifically what that employee needs in order to be successful. That's a very important question. If I have a new employee coming in, I sit down right away and say, what do you need from me in order to be successful? How do you best work? Do you want me to help you here? Do you want me to check on you? We were talking about that micromanaging boss. Do you need me to be like that? Or do you prefer for me to check on you occasionally? What works best for you? And oftentimes the employee might say, well, I really like to work on my own, and I like to know that I can get my tasks done on time, but I also want to know that if I have a question, I know where to go. And so that kind of relationship can be built from the beginning. And when we open the lines of communication from the start, that's how we create that relationship. And the employee then associates us with someone who's open-minded, ready to listen, ready to help, and one who believes in the skill set and the capabilities of that individual. And when we feel valued and we feel that we're a part of something bigger than ourselves that we can buy into and appreciate, then we take that inspiration with us and we're likely to stick around.
I really appreciate you talking about it. I remember one of my jobs, my first hour at the job was I opened the email and there was 120 emails in a mailbox. So I appreciate that you're talking about a boss that actually ask and inquire and do an onboarding process, which I think it's very crucial.
Sure, and just really showing that you care. Obviously, we go to work. So there are some organizations that truly need and benefit from more of a hierarchical structure, more rigor and rigidity. And there's nothing wrong with that if that fits the organization, the culture, the industry. But still, even in those types of settings, there's room for some type of personal connection, some type of approach where we actually feel like we are a valued individual and not just a cog in a wheel, not just somebody who we are paying to get a job done, a dime a dozen. If you feel that way, then why would you want to be there?
Any thoughts on a conflict in a workplace?
Sure. There's always conflict. And I think that it's around, and it doesn't have to be bad. Conflict could be when we have some type of a differing of opinion and we're battling that out. We're having an intellectual discussion about the better choice for a particular initiative or, a particular solution to a problem. That's really fun. That gets, the juices flowing. That's exciting and invigorating. So that also, though, technically, if you think about it, while it's not particularly negative, it is a conflict. It's a battle of the minds, and that we want. Now, caustic behavior or uncomfortable behavior, mean behavior, all of the different things that we see in the book, that we want to try to minimize or avoid. And sometimes the answer is, hey, this place isn't for me, or this boss isn't for me. I need to move to a different department because I can't handle this, or it's not healthy for me to deal with that. If something is bothering you when you're home and when you are no longer working, then that might mean that a very big sign that you've got to really fix it. If it's something that's just annoying during the day for a couple of minutes and you move past it, then it might not be something that is as serious. But we need to know where we can go if we do experience conflict, if there's a human resources team within the organization or perhaps even an anonymous hotline. There are a lot of options available depending on the type of issue, the degree and severity of that conflict. So it's definitely important that you know the avenues where you can speak up and to whom you can confide so that you can make sure that your workplace is comfortable for you and, a safe environment from an emotional standpoint in addition to obviously a physical standpoint.
And know your rights, right? Inquire what you can do or cannot do, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. How do you evaluate your own success?
I evaluate my success by seeing if I actually meet my particular goals. I make sure that my goals are specific and measurable and attainable and that they're realistic, and I give them a specific time frame. So I make sure that I have to reach for that goal, but I also break the goal down into small enough chunks that I can feel happy and proud when I accomplish the baby steps that lead me to the bigger goal. And so I think that doing so, as long as I'm moving forward, then I'm comfortable. We either learn to fail or we fail to learn. So I think that there's nothing wrong with failure. Failure is fantastic. When we make mistakes, then those mistakes help us to not make the same mistake again the next time and perhaps lead us on the road to discovery of something that we never would have thought of before. So we have to have that positive frame of mind, but also by holding myself personally accountable for whatever it is that I commit to doing and being fair, giving myself that chance to breathe, giving myself the chance to take a beat, to take a pause when necessary, recognizing that, I'm not a robot, but I'm a human being with other things that are just as important, and making sure that part of my goals don't only include monetary gain or career or financial success, but also the things that matter to me personally. My spouse, my relationship with my children, the hobbies that I have and the things that I want to do. So those are also goals that I work to attain. This year, my goal is to get a little bit more sleep. I've been finding that I need more than I used to need, and so I'm working on inching toward getting more sleep. And last year, I only got 7 hours of sleep a night, and closing out 2018 was 7 hours and 15 minutes. So I am very proud of that extra 15 minutes, and in 2019, I hope I'm at 7.5 hours a night. So that's something that's just for me, but it means something and it's important, and I'm going to make it happen because I value it.
Interesting. So again, going back to know yourself, know what matters to you and what you need.
Sure, and recognize that that can change. What was important to you, in your teens might be different than what's important to you in your 20s or 30s or 50s or 80s. And so recognizing the impact of the life cycle on the way that we prioritize and make decisions is very important. We also have to think about our environment and the things that are important to our family, to our community. So there are a lot of things that weigh on our decision-making and how we prioritize and value our time. And so it's really important to feel fulfilled and to feel whole. And to me, that is what is so important. And that's why I stop and look at that tree. For whatever reason, that brings me that little bit of extra time where I can just breathe and go, wow, that's beautiful. And we need to find whatever it is that brings us that feeling, that gives us that emotional high. It's very, very important to take that and just to stop and breathe.
I'd like to just circle back. You mentioned failures. I'd like to call them setbacks. And what are your suggestions? How to effectively work through setbacks or failures?
Well, we need to, first off, think if the setback has anything to do with us or if it has to do with outside factors. So we can't beat ourselves up about things that don't have anything that we can control. For instance, if, we take an exercise routine and you're supposed to go on a run, but then it's pouring down rain with a thunderstorm. Well, you didn't meet your goal, but you didn't particularly fail in the same way that you might have otherwise because nature, decided that you weren't going outside. But if you can find an alternative for those situations in the future and create a contingency plan so that if you have that same situation again and you want to get your run in, then maybe you can do so inside or indoors during days when it's raining. So taking something that wouldn't have worked and then recognizing what you can do to fix it for the future is the way to success. So we don't necessarily know what is going to fail until it does. And if it fails once, then we try again. We change things a bit. We try a different approach. And each time we might get a little bit closer to that actual perfect or close to perfect finale. But we have to recognize that that road might be a lot more curvy than that straight arrow that we thought originally. And so as long as we're able to learn from and not make the same mistake twice or 3 times or 5 times, but rather continue to adjust and fix until we get that perfect recipe, then that's how we can feel positive instead of uncomfortable. So taking it and moving forward, not beating yourself up about it, but rather saying, here's what I can do to get what I need and to be successful the next time or more successful the next time.
So what I'm hearing is be introspective, evaluate, and restructure and create a different path maybe so that you can succeed.
Sure, and recognize that that next time, hopefully you're a little bit better, but maybe not as close as you'd hoped. Think about the chef who's working on this mastery sauce, and all he wants to do is get this sauce just right. Well, so the first one, he throws it out, and the second one's a little bit better, but not quite right. So you keep going, you keep going, you keep going until you end up getting to that perfect flavor. And so it really does take time, and it's more of an issue of refinement than failure. And yes, technically we can fail, and we need to be able to own it. We need to say, you know what, I tried this and it didn't work, or I was supposed to do this and I didn't do it right. That's okay, because next time if I'm faced with the same circumstance, it won't happen again.
And don't be hard on ourselves, because it seems like we can be the hardest critic, right?
We can be, and I think it's important to hold ourselves accountable and not to minimize the impact of a poor decision or a less than great choice. But we should be able to say, what can I do so that if I'm faced with this exact same situation again, whether it be professionally or personally, what do I need to do so I don't do that again? So I'm not in this exact same situation next week, next month, next year. What do I need to do? And then owning that can help you to move past, and instead of berating, uplifting almost. Okay, so I've learned from this. Great, now I know. So now the next time, if I'm faced with this type of a situation, I won't go down that path.
Any thoughts on generosity and leadership?
Oh, sure. I think it's very important to be open-minded, to recognize that sometimes we can be generous just with the way that we sincerely praise someone. It can also be being generous with time, respecting the time and the boundaries of the individuals who work for us. Obviously, it can also be paying in a fair way, making sure that we are showing our employees that they are an important investment and that we truly look at them as individuals. So being generous is not just from a monetary standpoint. It's really being generous with your time, being generous with your ideas, being generous with the freedom that you give others, and empowering others to have the opportunity to make those choices on their own so that they can be successful. So when we have that generosity, I like to think of it really as openness and caring. When we are able to be open, caring, and flexible, then we are perceived as generous and kind and thoughtful leader.
And how do you stay humble while leading others?
See, I think the best leaders truly are humble because they recognize the sheer strength and the power of the individuals who work for them. And so when we're able to see that we need everyone on the team in order to move forward, and there is that true interdependence, yes, there's a leader of the pack, but that leader's job is to inspire others. And leaders who truly do their job are inspired by their people every day.
And do you believe that being assertive helps you lead better?
I do. I think that we need to be assertive, but that doesn't mean that we need to be dictatorial. We need to know when to say, okay, I'm throwing the ball to you, you can take the lead. So we don't always have to be that primary, you do what I say type of leader, because that's really more of the dictator type role, which isn't as effective as saying, you know what, hey, I've got an idea, I want to hear what you have to say, and then we'll come together and decide. Or I want you to know that most likely we're going to do this, but the floor is open. If anyone has any other ideas, try to wow me.
Interesting, because, I used to have a boss who actually always wanted to do his way. But what you're saying to us, it doesn't have to be the boss's way.
It really doesn't. And truly, the leaders who are seen as effective seen as one who others want to be led by, those leaders aren't like that. Those leaders are inspiring. Those leaders have a very strong message that is transformative and pushes the followers to do more than they thought they could do. But those leaders also listen. Those leaders engage with their employees or with their followers, and those leaders allow people to feel like they count. And so it's very, very important to have that empathy and to be kind and caring. And I think when you're kind toward others, then they in turn are more likely to be kind to you.
Yeah, because they reflect your behavior in some respect.
Sure.
Any thoughts for women leaders?
Sure. I think that in today's world, it's very tricky because there are so many women who want to make sure that they have a voice. And, you know, with some of the things going on politically with the Me Too movement and such, it can actually hinder the ability for a woman to be heard in the workplace as she might wish to be heard. Because we don't want it to be that we get a position or a role because we are female. We want to get a position or a role because we are the most qualified. And when we dampen that, then it ends up causing a lot of friction between genders and even within gender. And so it's really important to not focus as much on the fact whether you are male or female, but rather to focus on the idea that banding together, working together, and relying on your network and being seen as a team player will get you further than necessarily playing that gender card. And remembering to act and lead with humility. It's the same regardless of gender, and I think it's important to take a breath and realize that, because I think there's a lot of hype right now, and it can actually really work to the detriment of everyone within the organization.
So what you're saying to us, leadership is gender neutral.
It really is, and it should be. And I think that the best leaders, you know, if you have a woman leader, then likely you might find more empathy. You might find a little bit more of a gentle approach, but that's not necessarily true. And that's where the stereotyping is different than what we might anticipate. Because a lot of times, female leaders who make it to very high-level leadership roles tend to portray more masculine traits. And that is partly because that's what's expected as they move up the chain. But and slowly I think some of those changes we're seeing that it's not as extreme and severe as it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago. But we don't want to do that. We want to try our best to stay away from any type of stereotyping or branding in any sort, recognizing and appreciating the individuals who are leading for their particular skill sets. Doesn't mean that if we happen to be a very empathetic male that we shouldn't show that side and be kind and extra sweet or, you know, thoughtful toward our employees. That's something that would be appreciated around the boardroom. So I think it's important to focus less on gender and more on what it is that we can do to inspire others who are following us or who are our employees so that they feel empowered and really valued within the organization.
And what is your mission in life?
My mission in life is to make a difference with the people who matter, with my family, with my community, and to feel happy and remember to always be grateful.
And how can people learn more about your company or contact you?
So my website is amycooperhakim.com. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Amy Cooper Hakim. My business is the Cooper Strategic Group, and I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for being a guest.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Such a nice time. Thank you.
Our special guest was Dr. Amy Cooper Hakim, consultant, workplace expert, and speaker. And with that, thank you for tuning in and listening to the Leadership with Biana Kovic show. Please remember that you're all leaders in your own right, and that the impact that you're meant to achieve starts with small acts of kindness, curiosity, and generosity. If you like the show, please follow me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. You can also listen to the past episodes and subscribe to my Leadership with Biana Kovic YouTube channel. I wish you a wonderful evening. Until next time, thank you again and have a great night.